Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to edition 47 of the Food Safety Fridays webinar programme. My name's Simon Timpley. Today, we're going to be talking about food safety horizon scanning. Has anyone watched the Discovery Channel? Things like that, where you've got those meerkats that stand on those little mounds and they're watching out. They're looking out into the near and the far distance, and they're looking for predators. And it's really important to keep your eye on the horizon. And in food safety context, obviously looking for threats and also opportunities to mitigate those threats and improve your business, perhaps even. Today we've got Ian Wright from NSF International, and we're going to be heading over to Ian shortly. I'd just like to say at this point, thanks to the sponsors, Safe Food 360, Trace Analytics, FSSC 22000, and Metal of Toledo, who help to bring these webinars free of charge to you every week. Get some free education, a short blast of education, and a free certificate of attendance. So there we go. Anything else to say? Today's webinar is being recorded, so don't worry if you have to go away for a couple of minutes, get called away, or you lose connection. Within 24 hours, we always send the recorded video and the slides together, so don't worry about that. Okay. I'd just like to welcome Ian Wright. Hi, Ian. How are you doing?
I'm great, thank you, and welcome everybody.
And can you just tell the audience where you're coming from today, where you're based?
We're currently broadcasting, I guess, from our absolutely new building, which we moved into on Monday, based on the University of Guelph campus in Guelph, Ontario.
Fantastic. Okay, Ian, while you get your presentation ready, I'll just talk about next week's webinar. So I'll be back to you shortly. Okay.
Okay.
In the offers tab, ladies and gents, we've got, if you just click top right, there's a tab there. You've got chat room, polls, and offers. If you click the offers one, you'll see a picture of Chris Domenico from Safe Food 360. Now, Chris is here next week to talk about HARP-C. He's going to give a walkthrough of how to transition from modern current HACCP plans to HARP-C, what you might need to do and how you need to transition. So that should be a good session, especially if that relates to you, the Food Safety Modernisation Act. Okay, today we've got polls. I think we've got 6 polls, so lots of interaction and engagement. Hopefully you'll comment and ask questions and join us with those polls. And we'll have a great presentation today. So without further ado, it's over to Ian. Okay, Ian?
Thank you, Simon. And good morning and good afternoon. My name is Ian Wright. I'm a graduate of the Food Science Department of the University of Guelph. I spent 20 years in the food processing industry in quality and operations management. Spent a little time as an independent contractor and joined the Guelph Food Technology Center in 2004 as audit services manager. Grew up with the GFSI certifications as the lead auditor and certification manager for GFDC. And 4 years ago, we were joined with NSF and currently known as NSF Canada, where I'm a technical manager with the training department. And I train GFSI standards, auditing skills, HACCP, and a newly minted lead trainer for the preventive controls qualified individual for the Food Safety Modernization Act. Today, our goal is to have a look at some of the factors which could affect your business in the future and ask the question, what should managers be thinking about as they peer into the future? As that little meerkat atop of the mound, what might be immediate threats, and can we discern any long-range threats or opportunities for their businesses and facilities? So the first thing that we have is the impact of regulations. The affects all the stakeholders in the food chain, and a stable and transparent regulatory environment benefits everybody in the food business, so that when things are changing, managers need to pay attention to avoid any surprises. The Food Safety Modernization Act, which is coming into force in September of this year in the US, is the first comprehensive overhaul of food regulations in the US in 73 years. FSMA, as it is known, will start to impact the larger manufacturers in September of this year. The new rules include regulations around produce production, human food, animal food, transport and distribution, and a foreign supplier verification program that requires that anyone who wants to export food to the US must demonstrate that they're in compliance to US FDA regulations. Unless, of course, they're regulated under USDA, in which case the current rules apply. Regulations is to put the responsibility for food safety and regulatory compliance firmly on the producers, processors, and distributors and importers. The FDA message has been very clear that food manufacturers must be able to demonstrate management of food safety by developing and implementing a risk-based preventive controls food safety plan. Each site must have a preventive controls qualified individual who's responsible for the development and management of the preventive food safety control plan. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't hire consultants, but it does mean you have to have a qualified individual to manage that. The approach to risk-based preventive controls for human food shares much with Codex or the National Advisory Committee HACCP methodology. Those facilities with mature HACCP-based food safety management systems are likely 90% or 95% of the way to having the necessary programs in place and being in compliance. But there are some things, especially that exporters to the USA need to know. Importer of record, well, not technically the importer of record, importers to the USA, whoever is designated as the importer, are required to prove that their suppliers have preventive controls in place. Importers are required to have and produce documentation for each food and each supplier to demonstrate that preventive controls are in place for any hazards in the food that are likely to occur. So exporters to the USA need to be prepared with what documentation and evidence they're prepared and required to supply to any importer. If you're supplying a high-risk food into the USA, FDA may specify that the required evidence will include that the supplier pass an unannounced FDA regulatory audit, which is being conducted by a qualified auditor. GFSI scheme certification audits are not sufficient and not accepted as qualifying audits for importers. Qualified auditors could include qualified third-party auditors or qualified regulatory personnel present in the producing country. How this is going to play out in the next year is really uncertain, as we're just getting to the start of this progress. If you're exporting to the USA, the Foreign Supplier Verification Program seems to include food contact materials and packaging, something that's not really evident in the regulations, but if you look at the Federal Register discussion around the Foreign Supplier Verification Program, it clearly states that packaging materials and food contact materials are expected to be included and demonstrate compliance with preventive controls. So, Food Safety Modernization Act. The challenges are that it takes reading and reading and rereading to get a good feel for what that involves. And we also know that as it gets implemented, as people engage with it, systems, they're likely to change. In Canada, the Safe Food for Canadians Act, which is in the process of being implemented, similarly extends the requirements to all for a preventive control plan and shares much in common, although there will no doubt be slight differences. One of the characteristics of this that is being broadcast by the CFIA is the requirement for facilities to be able to validate the effectiveness of their controls, which is, and the message we're getting is that the quality and the amount of validation is expected to increase as may be required to some extent for the FSMA regulation as well. Other countries around the world that have had major overhaul of their regulations and legislation includes China, where in response to numerous food safety issues and apparent struggles with oversight and enforcement, they've implemented new regulations and revised standards. The plethora of new standards and new requirements makes exporting to China more challenging, and domestically, the concerns over food safety remain a concern for what is reportedly a somewhat skeptical population. For those importing foods from China, strong ties within the country and robust oversight of suppliers appears to be the safest way to manage any food safety risks. So now we have a polling question. Are foods changing in your part of the world?
Okay, ladies and gents, I've loaded that in the sidebar. Are food safety regulations changing in your region? Possible answers: regulations are changing, but our business is not impacted. Regulations are changing and have a big impact on our business. Regulations are not being revised at this time. And the final possible answer is not sure. I don't know if you can see that, Ian, in the sidebar. We've got a clear winner, which is the second one. Regulations are changing and have a big impact on our business. That's about 60%. So
yeah, I can see that. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting.
Yeah. So it's big impact in the next 2 or 3 years.
Okay. I'll end that. We can move on now. Yeah.
Okay. I just had to find my mouse. There we go. So food fraud remains part of the agenda for 2016 and certainly the near future. An increased awareness in developing mitigations strategies starting to take hold. In a recent survey, only 25% of managers reported that tracking food fraud issues was easy. I know this slide shows Ops on 4, but in fact, Operation Ops on 5 is the latest effort of Interpol and Europol in coordinated activities to investigate and prosecute fake food and hazardous food. More than 10,000 tons in liters of hazardous fake food and drink were seized in these operations across 57 countries. Counterfeit sugar contaminated with fertilizer in Khartoum, Sudan. Italian officers recovered more than 85 tons of olives which had been painted with copper sulfate solution to enhance their color. Repackaging of peanuts as pine nuts, dangerous ingredients sold as natural dietary supplements, and illegal meat products. Interpol characterizes the causes as rising food prices and the global nature of the food chain, offering opportunities for criminals to sell counterfeit and substandard food in a multi-million criminal industry, which has the potential of serious food safety threats to unsuspecting customers. It's also been pointed out that this is a temptation to organized criminal groups because the penalties for food fraud are not nearly as severe as they are for drug trafficking and similar criminal activities. So the potential of risk to health has actually something that people are starting to be concerned about, and also the threat to their brand names and public trust in the food system in general. Around the globe have garnered publicity, none more than melamine in pet food and infant milk. However, there's many other findings, such as common substitution of fish or lower value for a higher value fish product in many of the major fish markets around the US, bleaching of rotten chicken, rice made of plastic, milk with vegetable oil and filler, and frozen fish presented as fresh. Food fraud's not going away. It's been around a long time. There is evidence of substitution dating back to Roman times, and the initial impetus around current food regulations generally arose from the addition of toxic substances being added to food to increase profits. The new requirement requires, the regulation requires a vulnerability to substitution as a hazard to be considered. Substitution may present a food safety threat. So it's making it into the requirements of hazard analysis and risk assessment in regulation. When it comes to fraud, our natural instincts is to hear what happened to others and how they've been cheated so we can prevent it happening to us. And that may account for our fascination with food fraud. However, this approach is closing the barn door after the horse has been stolen. The challenge is to figure out in advance what may be vulnerable and figure out how that risk could be best managed. So what is a manager supposed to do? Take it seriously, make sure everyone is aware of the potential for food fraud. The cost of food fraud is estimated at about $40 billion annually. The conclusion of academics is that crime prevention techniques are the best strategies, and there's some easily remembered rules. If the deal's too good to be true, it probably is. And if the material is high value, easy to mimic, and substitution is hard to detect, then it is vulnerable to substitution. So some examples of that include olive oil, dairy products, honey, saffron, juices, apple juice, teas, a green or brown, powdery or filleted fish. It's hard to tell one from another. Any brown powder, some sort of bean, and black pepper. Some of the results of DNA testing have shown that it's very easy to blend in ground up papaya seeds with black pepper. And more recently, we've had cumin adulterated with ground nutshells, posing both a human health threat and cheating the public. Include having a clear understanding of the supply chain and being prepared to test known adulterants where they might be used in your products. So conducting vulnerability assessments and supplier risk assessments is becoming part of normal management practice in order to deal with food fraud. It's just showing understanding supply chain, as it's been reported that especially with the horse meat scandal in the UK, that losing track of the supply chain was one of the things they found extremely difficult when doing the survey. Know your supplier, and it's in regulation. So the polling question around this is, do you have a supplier management program in place?
Yeah, I've loaded that in the sidebar, ladies and gents. Do you have a supplier management program in place? Yes, no, we are working on it and not sure. So a large number of attendees, over 70%, have a supplier management program in place. And if not, they are working towards it, which is good.
Supplier management programs are pretty much standard practice. It's working in the risk around food fraud and substitution that I think presents the challenge, but I think we're rapidly gaining more knowledge about some of the best practices around that, but something that managers definitely can't afford to ignore moving forward. Okay. Litigation, if we're moving on, definitely the focus on litigation is around principally around what is happening in the USA. FDA and the CFI in Canada, for that matter, states that they've always pursued criminal sanctions where appropriate, and although not well publicized, usually have several prosecutions going at any one time. But what does a manager have to know about the current environment and situation? Foodborne illness is considered preventable by the Center for Disease Control. Every day, 131,000 people will become ill from the food they eat. 350 people are going to be hospitalized today, and 8 people will die. With the advent of the Food Safety Modernization Act and expansion of the FDA powers, the FDA is under tremendous pressure to show results and reduce foodborne illness in the USA. The USA Department of Justice, late last year, published an internal memo that they would take an initiative to pursue individuals rather than corporations when malfeasance was seen. Although directed initially towards the financial system, there is a very strong sense in the US that this policy will be directed at any potential evidence of corporate malfeasance. As the memo states, by seeking accountability from the individuals who perpetrated the wrongdoing. You can't put a corporation in jail, but you can put a person there. Combined with the US law of strict liability, where an individual does not actually have to be at fault to be found guilty, one is strictly liable provided that the injured party can prove that the item was defective. Managers should be aware of their vulnerability. Things will get worse if a manager knew there was an issue and were in a position that they may have done something about it and were not trying to prevent it. If you know there are issues or there's a potential or an actual contamination of the food, quite harshly. Managers should also be aware that the Food Safety Modernization Act contains whistleblower provisions designed to protect individuals who decide to report contaminated or poor conditions to the regulator. In Canada, the Food Inspection Agency has gained additional powers to assess monetary penalties on those operations that fail to comply with documentation, implementation, or record keeping related to food safety controls. CFI has always had the power to prosecute anyone who violated the Food and Drug Act. However, there have been no high publicized prosecutions such as Peanut Corporation of America or Jensen Farms. In other jurisdictions, food safety violations could be even more drastically punished. It was reported in 2007 that a former head of a Chinese state food and drug administration was executed by lethal injection for taking bribes related to state licenses. So obviously the state of regulations and the potential for prosecution needs to be understood. Don't think we have a poll related to that, so move on to...
There is one.
Yeah.
Do you have a testing laboratory at your facility? But I don't know if it's on the next slide or...
Yes, I think there is. Yeah.
Okay.
Coming up.
Okay.
Right. I remember when I was working in operations that you always wanted your tests and results right now. And it seemed that constant visits to the lab really didn't speed up the result of testing. And you couldn't do much about it, so you had to be patient. And when it came to microbiological and pathogen testing, it could take several days before you get results. And you have to wonder what we did before ATP methods were available to verify that our food contact surfaces were clean. ATP as a rapid method seems to have become standard practices in many operations. There's a wide range of potential rapid relative to old methods for detecting various pathogens, and it's still something that industry really wants to see. There's many choices and many selections, and managers are faced with is it worth looking at increased testing, and are there any methodologies out there that can give near instantaneous results? The challenge with rapid methods is the food gets in the way. The various food matrices tends to affect most potentially rapid methods in one way or another. Each method has to be validated food by food by food. But rapid methods are useful to food companies, especially where they have short shelf life products and they need to have a rapid understanding of whether they're running any risks. Food testing could never replace preventive controls. You just simply can't do enough samples to get 99.9% surety that your food is safe, and it's nearly impossible to detect low-level and intermittent contamination with pathogens. But with the advent of rapid tests and some even faster tests on the horizon, managers can expect to see a demand from customers and perhaps consumers for increased testing. And the challenges for managers is selecting the right technology and using the right sampling methods and drawing the right conclusions from rapid methods. However, rapid methods have a role in risk management, if not risk elimination. The other impact of developed rapid methods has been the use of faster and less expensive whole genome sequencing to fingerprint pathogens that can cause illness. Whenever a person in the USA is diagnosed with a foodborne pathogen, that pathogen sample is taken and fingerprinted, and the results are stored in a database. And we'll talk about what happens to that data later and its impact on managers. On the food fraud side, DNA, whether it's whole genome sequencing or partial DNA methods using RNA, are faster, easier, and cheaper than before, and they're able to detect cross-species contamination, blending, and especially seafood fraud. So, but they also, and they require a certain amount of expertise to do. Recently, Dr. Elliott of Elliott Report fame had a webinar where he's working on a system which uses rapid evaporative ionization mass spectrometry. It's instantaneous results by ionizing the sample and comparing it to a database, which needs to be developed of other samples. It's possible to detect adulteration. And we're absolute near instantaneous results without needing to employ DNA methods or even highly trained personnel might be, and those kind of results are required quickly. This shows a promising technology for the future. So what's a manager going to do? Obviously, they need to consider what the increased costs of these methods might be, but rather than adopting new technology as a cost reduction investment, you may want to consider it as a risk reduction initiative. But certainly, there's going to be opportunities in the future, and perhaps coming out our tricorders, wave them over our food and decide that it's safe to eat. I'll leave that there. So our next polling question just asks, is anyone using rapid methods?
Okay. I've loaded that, ladies and gents. Do you use rapid testing techniques for product testing? Yes. Well, it's a two-part question. Do you have a testing laboratory at your facility, and do you use rapid testing techniques for product testing? Yes, we have an in-house laboratory, but do not use rapid testing methods. Yes, we have an in-house laboratory, and we do use rapid testing methods. We do not have an in-house lab, but use rapid testing methods for testing products. I'm not sure. So how it's coming out is 35 have an in-house laboratory and they use rapid testing methods. Others do not have an in-house lab, so they outsource, but for rapid testing. And 23% have a lab, but not for rapid testing methods. Then 15% not sure.
It's interesting. I think technology is changing. other rapid methods which have impact in perhaps different areas. I mean, we focused on pathogens, but if you look at chemical testing, technology called organ on a chip, which you may have heard about, where we can test the effect of chemicals without using people or mice or rats. We can test the impact of food chemicals, I think may be of interest because of our additives and the chemicals that we're using in the food business. We may be finding out things about those in different ways. And that's certainly a longer range thing that we might be looking for when it comes to these new methods that could affect the food industry.
Yeah.
Unannounced audits are of interest to food operators, especially those supplying private label and who need to be GFSI certified. But interestingly enough, the FDA regulatory audits for importers are to be unannounced. So if you're exporting into the USA, you have a high-risk food, and they suggest that you're going to require one of these, those audits will be unannounced. It's been said that the GFSI in their revised benchmarking documents at least 1 in 3 unannounced audits, and the SQF standard has certainly gone that way, and the BRC standard has offered unannounced audits as an option for quite some time. ASDA and Walmart certainly have required unannounced audits, as has Costco, but not all retailers have driven or required unannounced audits, and the industry obviously prefers not to have unannounced audits, so some element of preparation and having the right people present can happen when an audit does happen. But if the regulator is going to show up unannounced, and people, retailers, and some food safety experts feel that unannounced is more of a true test of what happens every day, then managers should be aware that perhaps they need to be thinking about unannounced audits. The consensus is it does take time to prepare an organizational and operational culture to be ready all the time. But what kind of message does it send to employees and the workforce when you are trying to manage on 2 standards? One when the audit is imminent and happening, and a different one when the auditor's not there. Doing well on unannounced audits means that companies have to have robust food safety operating cultures. All the functional groups within the organization have to be engaged and committed, and it needs a well-trained, knowledgeable workforce to achieve this mature and food safety operational culture. It's not easy to do, but it's something which managers should be aware of and very likely working towards. Food safety culture gets a lot of press, and it's been reported elsewhere that everyone has a food safety culture, and sometimes it's bad. Frank Yanis of Disney and Walmart fame suggests that we need to focus on using behavioral management techniques to drive better compliance rates. In other words, using behavior as the key to improving our food safety cultures. So it's likely that more specifiers will specify unannounced audits, that the expectation will be you're operating at a high level of compliance all the time, and managers should be either thinking about now or starting to plan for an unannounced future. So our polling question for this is, have you been the subject of an unannounced audit? Simon.
Okay, and there are a variety of options. A government audit, a GFSI audit, not yet, but we know it's coming. Not worried, not worried about it at this time, and not sure. Okay, that's surprising that actually. So 30% have had a GFSI unannounced audit. It's quite a, well, 23% actually. Yeah.
That's higher than I would have thought. Yeah.
Yeah, because is it at the moment, the present time, it's in BRC, but it's coming in other standards. Is that right?
No, it's of 3, so 1 year in every 3, has to be unannounced, and people have experienced that already under the SQF standard mainly in North America. And I see the numbers dropping as others.
Okay.
So we're down to 17%, which is probably a more reasonable number than 30%.
That's right.
I see the government can knock on the door anytime.
Yeah, and plenty of people know that it's coming, so perhaps that's why they're on the webinar.
Definitely coming. There's been a lot of talk at almost every food safety conference that I've been fortunate enough to attend about the impact of social media. A survey conducted at the CL conference in Canada recently, and it was an NSF survey, reported that 56% of respondents claimed that would be able to respond to a social media crisis within 4 hours, which is impressive, actually, and basically shows that there's a growing awareness of the potential impact of social media and acknowledging what kind of effect it might have. Whether 4 hours is fast enough or not, I'll leave to the experts to decide. But we do know that variations during a crisis just as a lack of media training can turn an on-camera interview into a disaster, so too can failure to apply sound strategies to managing social media. Being able to respond quickly and accurately with factual information to counter the misinformation and erroneous opinion-based rants that can appear on social media requires planning, and it requires forethought. And even when companies are not undergoing recalls or crises themselves, if they're in a similar business, they might be subject to what they call a halo effect. A study of car companies showed that similar companies can be affected when another company is having a recall. So being aware of that might be important. To quote from a Food Safety Magazine article, it's important to remember that consumers base their beliefs and reactions on their own interpretations of the risk. And we know it's been proven that human beings aren't very good at risk assessment. Good communication during a crisis becomes really important. Some of the characteristics we know about: you need to be certain and definitive. You need to show that action is taking place. You need to tell people what they can do. So what do managers do? The National Center for Food Protection and Defense recommends some steps: planning ahead for prompt responses, establishing a network, being willing to accept that there may be some uncertainty and being able to communicate that, and honest, and being accessible to the media, communicating compassion, and underlying all those strategies, a process to continuously evaluate and update crisis plans. What we see very often at audit, the thing, once a mock crisis, they want to get it over as fast as possible. It's usually linked to the mock recall plan, and they want to get it over done in an hour, and they don't seriously look at crisis or what could happen on social media, and they don't really have strategies to deal with it. And there have been some examples of fairly disastrous results for the company's reputation and potential future. We're talking about big data because we're inundated with data, and we can see the effects of big data. Big data is a term for data sets that's so large and complex. Processing method. The term is also applied sometimes to predictive analytics or other advanced mathematical methods to extract value from data so someone can actually take action on what is there, even though it might be hard to see. Global retailers collect huge quantities of data all the time, and the challenge is to know what to do with it and how to leverage it to benefit organizations. We know that retailers, with the massive amount of data they have, can tell how a product is doing something that isn't performing as well as another product on that same shelf place or in that category might do. So of big data can be fairly swift. And we know retailers use data to be able to target marketing plans and improve operations. Schemes and certification bodies have large amount of data on non-conformances, and that kind of information managers can take and apply to their own operations. And one of the things that you can use that data that you're getting from those bodies to say, well, if I'm having that problem and others are having that problem, perhaps it's not the fault of an individual, but perhaps there's something in the system or the way we're managing. Since I've got that problem and others have a similar problem, maybe it's something about the way we're managing it, looking for more systemic solutions to some of the common problems that we're experiencing. One area that large data sets and new testing techniques have intersected is the Center for Disease Control's collection of whole genome sequencing of foodborne illness pathogens. By fingerprinting the DNA of the pathogens taken from patients, the CDC has been able to match the patient samples with samples taken from retail and from processing locations and discover that foodborne illnesses have been happening when no one really knew about them. And the most dramatic example is Bluebell ice cream, where I think about 10 illnesses over 3 to 5 years is coming from a common source, and 3 ice cream plants were shut down for months while they tried to figure out whether that should be prevented. And listeria in ice cream might not have been seen as a potential hazard, but if you take ice cream and melt it in the fridge and use it for smoothies for vulnerable patients who find it difficult to or otherwise consume, then you've turned what may be a low risk for the general population into a high risk for a vulnerable one. Similar analytical results and linking of data has identified other outbreaks that weren't really known to be happening, and the resulting recalls have spanned over up to 6 months worth of production. So being aware of that impact in operations certainly is worth knowing about. Small data, not that it doesn't necessarily involve a lot of data, but small data, in contrast to big data, is to capture and use data on individuals or smaller buckets, if you like, in such a way that we can influence their behavior. And we all have examples of this when our behaviors on the web or the internet, whichever term you prefer, is used to target ads to our laptops or mobile devices. If we have loyalty cards based on our purchase patterns, that data is analyzed and we get the special coupons and the offers of the products that we purchase and that we're interested in. That's a use of lots of data, but in a small way to target a small bucket, which is the individual. So how does that affect a company manager? Well, we have, and whether we call it small data or not, we do have data on our employees, or we're starting to develop data on our employees. We might have data from learning management systems. So when they go through training and that training gets documented, especially if we're using online training and we have test results or knowledge tests or quiz results, we may be able to, using that data, identify people who we didn't realize might be stars or certainly more capable than they appear to us otherwise in our operations. And we can also identify people who may be struggling and need additional support and help. So that's one way to use data, whether we call it small data or not, to improve our operations. By combining data, such as the big insurance companies have on human behavior and human health, with specific information that we might have about employees, you could perhaps think about how data might be used to predict how certain employees might behave, what kind of supports they need over time in order to enhance our operations and maintain employee loyalty to us over time. We may be able to capture internal data in such a way to target specific behavioral messages to ensure that individual behaviors are aligned with food safety practices. Although I think that's probably a little further in the horizon. But the other thing that facilities should be thinking about is, what about the data I have? Can I use it to drive improvement? Have I got enough data? And everyone says we always need more data, but it's, can I use the data I have in such a way to help improve operations? And even with the, I mean, we've got lots of new sensors, and they're cheaper and easy to manage. We've got data logging, but I'm still not sure that we're able to integrate that data to provide managers with the kind of information they need about their operations, so they can target improvements and finding causes of problems. But we do need to start thinking about capturing data. We struggle to capture GMP violations, document errors, to get a sense of how employees are behaving. We really don't have that data. So we don't necessarily know where we are, how interesting it might be in the future to be able to use that data, have a mathematical analysis of it, and know where we were on some sort of risk spectrum as far as validating our food safety management systems. So perhaps in the future, that might be something that small data could be targeted at. So the polling question asks if your company gathers food safety and quality data. Everyone went to sleep. No.
Sorry, the poll is live in the sidebar. Does your organisation gather internal food safety and quality data on a regular basis? We hope to see a large proportion saying yes. And we do, 80% plus, no, 10, 11%, and not sure, a couple of percent. Okay, yeah. So the vast majority collect internal food safety and quality data.
The challenge is always, can you manage the data you have in a meaningful way to prevent or improve operations? Many of you might be aware of the Listeria monocytogenes foodborne illness that was a result of an issue with a meat company, a Canadian meat company called Maple Leaf Foods. They've been quite public in sharing what happened during that period, and Michael McCain's, the CEO, has been held up as an example of communication during a crisis. But they will say, we had the data, we just weren't able to see what the data was telling us. And so we may have data, but it's how we use it. And are we analyzing it in the correct way? That's a concern. So lastly, we're brief overview of training. Always a favorite topic for managers. Do I really have to shut down the plant to do training? Which the answer is no, you don't actually have to do training that way, but it often is seen as a more convenient way of carrying it out. And the default method is often to shut the facility down for a while and gather everyone together and then download a lot of information or data at them and give them a pizza for lunch. Food companies need well-trained, competent employees. And without competence and execution, the best plans are at risk of failure. The future is going to favor organizations which make the most effective use of the training budget to support knowledgeable, well-trained, and competent people at all levels of the organizations. Managers need training, QC people need training. Things are changing rapidly. They'll continue to change rapidly. People will need to be trained in order to deal with much of that. The workforce is changing. We're seeing a changing demographic in the workforce. Younger people are coming in. That will change perhaps how we have to deliver training. The puzzle that managers have to solve is they're given an unprecedented choice of methods of training delivery and what's the best way for them to proceed in the future. A very recent Camden BRI study indicated the responsibility for food safety training lies with the quality department. So it's not surprising that a definite current trend is to collect data and information, generally in databases which are known as learning management systems. This is part of a general food safety trend towards electronic management of food safety and quality records designed to aid in regulatory compliance. Learning management systems are increasingly in use either through direct investment or by using a service provider to house and manage companies' training data. Using a service provider enables SMEs to achieve the same benefits without the concern of owning, managing, and inevitably upgrading their software. Learning management systems can also be integrated with e-learning platforms, and in that mode can be used to capture information on an individual's progress and performance during web-based and e-learning sessions. So you can capture the data from quizzes, from knowledge checks, and you can actually see how much time they take through each module in a learning session. So this provides individual profiles in addition to providing a repository for the necessary records. But e-learning by itself isn't a plug-and-play solution. Managers report that training should improve food safety culture and drive effective employee performance. It's easy to create an array, but does that type of training engage learners and enable learners to develop competencies? Managers are faced with many different choices in how training could be delivered. Traditional face-to-face methods can be enhanced using adult learning techniques, clickers, polling questions to check comprehension, exercise opportunities for hands-on practice, and group discussion where knowledge and learning can be shared. Relatively new methods such as computer-based training are now cheaper and easier to deliver than ever before. I mean, they've been around for 20 years, but only the companies with deepest pockets have been able to put it together. Web-based training, so over the web or over the internet training, over laptops, computers, or mobile devices is now practical, and it can be used to deliver training when someone needs it and at the point of use. And we've heard cases of someone's out on the floor and they need to remember how to do something and they don't have a documented manual. They can look it up on their tablet, on their phone, which they're probably not supposed to have with them in the facility, but they can look up and someone can demonstrate how that's supposed to be done. Training can be, we can get experts broadcasting over long distances at any time because they can be recorded. Anyone who's watched a TED Talk has seen that. You're watching an expert talk about their field of. However, managers should always be aware that just training is not a solution to performance or execution issues, and training by itself isn't going to drive improvement. The challenge is to make the current investment in training more effective and better focused to achieve those cultural and execution competencies. So managers might want to think about how do they measure return on investment? What factors that they're already measuring indicate the success of training? Can that be measured? Can we use that information to take to management, to put in the budget, to use new methods and new techniques to improve training? We know a lot about what makes training effective, and we also know what causes training to fail. We know that operating culture affects how effective training is in its achieving its goals. We know that individuals have differing approaches to learning, and we know that how we deliver information can affect how different individuals learn. The demographics training we have just changing. We're getting younger people into the workplace. They have different expectations about how they learn. They're much more savvy about the mobile devices and using social media and YouTube and the web and websites to educate themselves and to learn things. We may have to adapt to that in order to get the message across. Every change in your facility needs to be trained every refresher training session, communicates management interest and engagement with the success of the workforce. The first interaction is with your food company is likely your induction training. So how a company manages that training activity can set the expectations and the patterns for the future. So the message to manager is, got to pay attention to provide good training, but the future is going to require training and get even better returns for your dollar or pound or euro. So that's just some of the different methods that we have. And we have a lot of questions about how food safety and quality training are handled in your organization.
Yeah, this is the final poll that we'd like you to vote on. How is food safety and quality training handled in your organization? It's all handled internally. We outsource training. Some training is done in-house and some outsourced. And we are a little behind in our training initiatives and then not sure. For those who can't find an answer. Okay, a mixture, in-house and outsourced is the favourite at 48%. And then internally, as a standalone, is 33. 0 on fully outsourced training.
I think that aligns with most information that, in fact, that outsourcing number is fairly high. I think the vast majority of people handle training in-house. So it's interesting that that number's up as high as it is. Yeah. But maybe we're talking about HACCP training for HACCP managers, yeah. Quality systems training, and those kind of things, and that would certainly be outsourced, like standard training and stuff like that.
Uh-huh. Okay, thanks, Andy.
So we're into the Q&A session. If there's any questions that I'm able to answer or that can find answers for people too, be happy to think about that. Right.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Ian. If you can stop sharing your slides now. We have got a fair number of questions that I've marked along the way. So,
okay.
Yeah. So,
okay, let me just, there we go. Okay, that should, am I stopped sharing now?
Yeah, you're back on webcam. Okay, scrolling right down, Andrea early on asked, does the PCQI require outside training, or if they have sufficient experience, is that enough? The PCQI.
That's a great question. Everyone has asked it. The answer is the FDA has said they will not be looking for formal FSPCA preventive controls qualified individual certificates. They will be assessing the competence of the PCQI based on control plan and whether they feel that is robust enough. However, having said that, and if you're able to demonstrate knowledge and experience to an FDA investigator, they will accept that. Many facilities have decided that that's not necessarily robust enough for them, and they've decided they're going to have a certificate to hand to an inspector or investigator, as the FDA is calling them, and that's a sort of safer place to be as far as an inspection goes.
Okay, and so what would some of the key things be in a skill set then for a PCQI? What would they be looking for?
Hazard identification, hazard analysis, risk assessment, understanding of the prerequisite programs, and then being able to familiar with the food safety risks, being able to identify risks that are known to occur or reasonably foreseeable or likely to occur, and being able to design and manage preventive control programs to control and either reduce, eliminate, or prevent those risks, hazards from occurring.
Okay, sounds like you've got a training course already there.
we're qualified. There's an official FSPCA course. It's if I could show you the binder, it's about 4 inches thick. but it's all designed. It's prerequisite programs and hazard analysis and risk assessment. And anyone who's been HACCP trained would be familiar with most of it. What's different is some of the language and the challenges. When's a preventive control a preventive control?
Okay. Andrea, a second question from Andrea was, how do you show compliance to FMSA on import? How do you show compliance on import?
So initially, what they're looking for is they want a copy of your preventive control plan, and the question is, do you have to give them everything, all the documents, or do you just need to show like it shows you, here's my preventive control, here's my monitoring, here's my verification, or do you have to show them the full analysis and all the evidence of validation? And that's a question we're still needing an answer to. It's not clear what you are required to present to an importer and what they're required to show the government. As an importer, they're going to say, well, show me evidence.
Okay. Thank you for that, Ian. Are you aware, David McGee has asked, what websites allow individual ingredient horizon scan searches? Are you aware of any particular websites? Have you got any references for that? Or maybe we could provide some as a follow-up.
There are a couple of websites, but the one that I've been actually using to look up individual ingredients category is actually the rapid response for food and animal feed out of Europe, because you can look up and fairly fine granular look up in a granular way, look up kinds of ingredients and see the kinds of things that have been happening cross-border in Europe, and that gives you a good as feel as any other database I'm aware of the kind of things that are happening. So from a food safety point of view, from a food fraud point of view, there isn't a database that can get all your ingredients.
Okay.
Not that I'm aware of. There is a USP database that deals with fraud, but it's not really as extensive as I think that you're asking about.
Okay. And David, another follow-up question is talking about VASP, vulnerability assessment. How can you group raw material to reduce effort? I guess if you've got a lot of ingredients, he's asking, how can you group them, I suppose? Depends what the product is, I guess.
Yeah, again, so are they low-cost ingredients? Is it worth anyone substituting them? The categories, the vulnerability assessment is really around, is it worth anyone's time? Is it easy to substitute? Question you can ask is how to detect economic adulteration in that particular ingredient. So high value, easy to substitute ingredients. So spices, for instance, many of them are granular or small leaves, and it's very easy to substitute. Dr. Chris Elliott is looking and surveying oregano. Percent of the samples between 30 and 70% have some degree of mixing with something else.
Yeah, and I suppose also, Ian, if there's previous history of that particular ingredient being implicated as well.
And I'm not sure there's a central depository that reports all food frauds, but it might be useful.
Well, somebody actually in the chat had typed in www.foodfraud.org, which is quite handy. Maybe people go there, foodfraud.org, and just check it out and see what it's like.
Sure.
Let's have a look further up. Is food packaging, this is Indrana, is food packaging, do we need a rapid test, and how to test it for food contact packaging? Are there any rapid tests available?
I'm not aware of rapid tests that talk about chemical migration out of food packaging. Generally, they have to be sent away. NSF can do it in Ann Arbor, I believe. From where I'm sitting, there's other European centers can do that kind of testing. Rapid methods for the issue, like not foods. I'm not aware of methods that do that are readily available for individual companies to a lab.
Yeah, if they were looking for, I suppose if they were looking to test for microbes on food packaging, you can just, is it like TVC? Is there a rapid test for TVCs or something like that? I don't know whether.
Off the top of my head, I'm not aware of those packaging.
Okay.
But I imagine you can sample. I mean, I imagine sample packaging as you would sample a food contact surface.
Yeah. Let's have a look. I'm trying to scroll through. What components of the food fraud program should I have? That's a bit of a wide question, I think, isn't it? Aquilio is asking, what are the components of a food fraud program?
The vulnerability of the materials and a risk assessment of your suppliers are the two main criteria.
Okay.
So how well you know your supply chain and your suppliers of your suppliers as well, perhaps, if you're concerned about the supply chain.
Okay. And various people have been posting references there to different sites and books and reference materials. And Imran is asking, how often should we test our crisis management program? Slightly off topic, but...
Well, it's related to that social media concern, and the usual frequency is at least once a year. Depends on if you've got a really robust program and you know it works, that you still need to test it. The challenge is many people just pay lip service to it, and when it actually comes to a crisis, they're not fully prepared. They haven't thought through what actually happens, and they don't force people to actually execute their roles in crisis management. What the result is, what you're doing during natural crisis is training everybody in what they're supposed to do, which just creates awful confusion and panic. One of the people who contract is retired from the CFIA. He's an ex-vice president. He sat on the national recall committees, and he basically get down on his knees and beg you to practice this stuff, because when it actually happens, public health is at risk, your brand is at risk, the speed and the ability to execute is critical. You just can't afford to lose track of something that's a threat to public health, and so much chaos and damage is done for people who are unprepared.
Yeah, and we've seen, like you said, the benefits of getting it right, even in a crisis, and getting it wrong, the perception of the public to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're on almost 10 past now, so we were scheduled for an hour. So I'd like to say thanks very much for your input today, and it's been really good. We've had lots of interaction and questions and comments. So thank you very much, Ian.
Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Okay, hope to see you again soon.
Thanks for inviting me. Okay.
Right. Cheers, Ian.
All right. Bye-bye.
Okay, what we will do, ladies and gents, with the video and the presentation, we'll send the chat log as well, which obviously then there's a lot of references in there, so you'll get that as well, some links in there. So on the whole, very good webinar. Next week, we've got Chris Domenico from Safety 360, who's going to be talking about HARP-C and how to transition from the standard HACCP to HARP-C, step-by-step guide. So that'll be useful. When you get the email, just click the link to register for that. I've loaded the certificate in the sidebar, so click the download now button. It'll open a new window, and then you can go there and get it from Dropbox. If you don't get it today, as I said, we'll send the email and you can pick it up from there. Thanks for your attendance today. If you're watching this on YouTube, subscribe, give us a like, feel free to comment in the box, because all of our 47 webinars are on YouTube, the IFSQN YouTube channel. Okay, so thanks for your attendance today. Look forward to seeing you next Friday. Happy Friday. Enjoy your weekend. Take care.